Information Regulator says the Protection of Personal Information Act will finally come into effect this year. It was first proposed more than a decade ago, and the regulator has kick-started the legal processes to implement the act. The act will mean that companies will no longer be able to give out consumers' details to other businesses. So for more insight on that, we're joined now by Information Regulator Chairperson Nzitla Kula. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having us, and good afternoon to you.
Let's talk a little bit about this. 10 years in the making. 2020, we're anticipating that it's finally going to be implemented. One may say that consumers will benefit depending on how it's actually implemented in itself. In other words, the application of the act becomes quite critical as such. So what are you foreseeing in terms of the way in which the act will be applied?
The first thing to say is that the person who has to bring the remaining sections of the act into operation is the President of the country. So we have written to him and requested him to do so by the beginning of the financial year. But you have to remember that the Act gives quite serious enforcement powers to the Information Regulator, so that any public or private body, and we have to stress that the Act applies to both private and public bodies, because I saw that you were talking about companies in the clip that we introduced. But any public or private body that violates the provisions of the Act can be levied an administrative fee of up to 10 million rands. And there are also provisions for criminal prosecution. So the Act gives us, as the regulator, quite serious enforcement powers.
Let's talk a little bit about the extent at which the Act can be applied in itself, because, I mean, articles say this. I mean, you said that even the way in which you were reading this information on air also says this. We automatically think that it's about the dissemination of information without your consent, especially by private or public bodies. And a lot of times we attribute it to, for example, marketers, right? And the calls that you get in the most ungodly hours of the morning or in the evening, asking you if you want, or even having those messaging or answering machines that actually give you information regarding selling something, etc. But how far does that? It covers that. But how far does the Act actually cover in terms of the protection of your information?
You see, the thing is not only about marketers who access our information unlawfully. It's also about us giving out our information out there, especially young people who like giving out their information on social media platforms. And once you give out your personal information and it's out there, it's in the public domain and it's not protected. I think it's important to do that, to say that. The second thing is that we're hoping that the people that we give, or the companies or public or private bodies that we give our personal information to, we hope that they have adequate security measures in place to protect our personal information. This morning I was listening to the interview that your colleague Jeremy was doing with, I don't know whether it's your colleague, on how, you know, the apps have made it so easy for them to access all sorts of information, including, you know, having a braai and getting people through the apps to come and clean up your house. Of course, you give out that personal information when you download these apps, because they're going to ask you for personal information. And you're hoping that those people have security measures in place to protect your personal information. If they don't have, then if they are hacked and your personal information is accessed, you can imagine the damage that can be done to you. But it's also, I think, the issue that is in this country that we have to pay attention to is surveillance. Surveillance is becoming very, very intrusive. If you look at in the suburbs, you have these Vuma cameras that are all over that collect our personal information. If we enter security or offices, or in fact offices, what do? They take the registration number of your car. They scan your license disc. They scan your ID number. What do your license? What do they do with all that personal information? So these are the issues that are contemporary that we are dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking about that. I mean, I even had a conversation, I think, with one of a security expert, speaking about how even when you access into complexes, and this is what we take for granted, that sometimes they even scan your license disc, and that information is supposed to be done away with within, I think, about a 12 to 24-hour period. But most of those companies actually keep that information. So why are you keeping where I live and in the information that is on my identity document, or even on my license disc for that matter?
Some of them even sell it.
Yeah.
Because in other complexes, in addition to all that, they take your biometric data you have to scan your fingerprints. So that's a lot of information. And because in this country, the regulator is not fully operative, it's a free-for-all. And I don't even I don't even think that the government appreciates the importance of the information regulator, because everybody talks about the fourth industrial revolution, digital economy, Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence. All those technological innovations are underpinned by data.
Yeah, 100%. And where data is going to be the next currency, and actually data
is the new currency.
Right? So that brings it to question around, well, how far does this currency actually extend? Unfortunately, Pensi, we have run out of time, but before I let you go, when are we expecting this act to actually be implemented? Do we have a day and date?
Well, we have asked the President to bring the act into full operation on the 1st of April, which will be the new financial year. Okay. So the ball is in his court, really. The
ball is in his court. 1st of April 2020, Mr. President, if you're listening, please make sure that that comes into his form there. Thanks a lot for joining us and sharing some light. In terms of the importance, really, of having that POPI Act, and also how is it that you're going to be affected by some of the implementation that's going to go towards it? Well,